Hello everyone and welcome to Bite Size Mechanics, where I aim to demonstrate fundamental and creative game mechanics using Unity and C# scripting. I want to show you how individual mechanics work by themselves to give context on how they have their place in a more complex system. If you want to see more content on game programming, please subscribe and maybe suggest a mechanic of your own that interests you in the comments. So if I jump into Unity, I've got my demo scene laid out for me nicely right here. It just consists of my player, my camera, and a nice little plane for me to run around on. If you look at my hierarchy, I do have some pre-existing objects here, and we're just going to use some of them, but we're going to essentially be building this whole thing from scratch. So don't worry, I'll be taking you through the whole thing. So if we press play, you can see that I have my mouse movement here, and I can nicely run around with my nice little character animations for forward and strafing left and right. If you want to know how to do these animations, I've got another video called Animating Game Objects in Unity, so you should definitely check that out if you want to know how to do it. But the first thing I want to do, just to make this look a bit nicer, is I want to lock the mouse in the center of the screen and make it disappear, because it will just make things a lot easier for my own visual orientation. So what we're going to do is just going to exit that, press stop, and we're going to create a script for the main camera. So we're just going to go here, we're going to add component, and we're going to call it cam script, just for simplicity. So once our cam script has appeared here, we're just going to open it up, edit script, and then you can see we've got it here in Visual Studio. So there's a lot of clutter here, so if we can just remove that, because we don't need it, we only need the void update. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go cursor.lock state, and we're going to set that equal to cursor lock mode dot locked, and then finish it off with a semicolon. Save that, go into Unity, let that compile, and then immediately if you hit play, our cursor locks into the center of the screen and disappears, so we get a nice movement feel there, and we can run around and do stuff. So once that's done, let's get to the real meat and potatoes. So we want to create our multi-purpose trigger script to be able to trigger all sorts of different events. So we'll start off here with our first empty game object. So what we want to do is we want to create empty, and then let's rename this to trigger. And then the first thing you want to do is you want to add a box collider to it, because it needs to be able to collect information for anything that collides with it. So you can see it's just appeared here as a green outlined square, and we want to edit that. We want to click the collider editor and just drag it over, just so it's nice and spaced out and easy for our player to walk into it. So that's that looks good to me. Cool. So as you can see, you won't be able to see it in the game view, but you will be able to see it in the scene view. Don't forget to set it to is trigger, otherwise it will just be a collider where things will actually hit it and stop at the wall. Is trigger just makes it an invisible trigger zone for anything to be able to pass through. So we want to go to our inspector, hit add component, and we're just going to create a new script, and we're going to call it trigger script, and we're going to create an add. Okay, so our trigger script has appeared right here. Don't forget to go to the project window and actually drag the scripts that you've made into your scripts folder, just for the sake of organization. So what we want to do is now we want to edit our trigger script. So as you can see here, there's a lot of clutter in the class. We actually don't need any of this. All we want is what's called a void on trigger enter. And what this will do is it will collect the information of any object that enters the trigger zone. So then we want to store that in a collider variable, and we can call it whatever we want. Let's just call it col. So the first thing we want to do is we don't want anything to be able to walk into our trigger zone and affect it, because essentially the trigger zones are for specific things. You might want to do it for anything, but in this instance we only want it to affect the player. Now there's nothing else in our scene, so it doesn't really matter, but this is just for the sake of accuracy. So we're going to do if col.transform.tag is equal to player. Now what this is it's taking the information of whatever is collided with our trigger, and then it wants to identify the tag of the object that has entered it. So if we go to our player and then go to the inspector, we'll see here on the top left hand corner of the inspector you'll see a player tag. Now you can set these tags to anything, and you can also create your own with add tag, but ours is just a player tag, and we must spell it exactly how it is spelled in the quotation marks. So now that we've done that, so we actually want the console to display a message for when something has actually hit the trigger. So we're going to do a debug.log parentheses, and then we're going to say col.name, and the col.name will actually display the name of the game object that's in the hierarchy. So right here above my head, I'm fading out, I'm going away, there we go. So right here above my head it will display that name plus is in trigger. So this message will display on the console once something is in the trigger, specifically our player. And then what we want is we actually want this to output a value, because we want this script to be able to communicate with other scripts, and that's what makes this tool a multi-purpose tool. So we want to go up here and we want to create a public bool. It's public because we want to see it in the inspector, and then we're going to call this is trigger semicolon. So then down here, once we've entered the trigger, you guessed it, we want to go is trigger true. And so this way, whatever enters our trigger, our bool value will equal true, and this message will display in our console. So now we want to do the same thing, except we want to collect the information for anything that leaves our trigger zone. So for this we want to write void on trigger exit, and then we want to give this the same variables col, and we still want it to identify the fact that it's our player entering and leaving the trigger zone. So we're just going to copy and paste everything here in our enter function. We're going to paste it in, and the only thing that will change is the message of the console window. So we want this to be out, and we want to change our is trigger value to false, and that's it. So what we've done is once it's entered we're going true, once it's exited we're going false. So I can demonstrate this for you. If we let that compile and then just check our trigger has appeared. You'll see is trigger here, and then this little checkbox that's appeared. Now keep your eye on the checkbox once we've entered the trigger zone. So I'm going to hit play. See our mouse has locked into the center of our screen. And I'm going to walk into the trigger zone, and you'll see instantly our checkbox has appeared checked to say that we're in the trigger zone. And if I just move out the way here, you'll see that the player is in the trigger. And then once I move out of the trigger, you'll see that the checkbox has unchecked, and you'll see that the player is now out the trigger. So now that we've actually got the trigger to feed back some data to us, we can actually make stuff happen with this trigger. So let's start off with cube number 1. Now cube number 1 is simply just a normal cube. It has no box collider on it. It's simply just a mesh, if you will. Now I want to make this quite bigger so we can see it. So I'm going to go here and just bump everything up to 5. I'm going to move it up in the world. Just put it quite kind of here. Okay, cool. So we don't want our scripts to actually be on the objects that we manipulate, because this could mess around with it in different ways, and you'll see why once I explain. So we're going to create another empty object called cube master. I'm just going to deactivate this one that I made earlier, but you essentially just go to the hierarchy and then create an empty object, and then we're going to call this one cube master. So first thing we want to do with our cube master is we want to create a cube master script. So I'm going to call that cube master script. Cool. So with this cube master script, the first thing we want to do is we actually want to reference the trigger script. So we actually want to get the variables that we made in the trigger script to affect what's happening in this script. So we're just going to reference the trigger script. So we're going to create a public trigger script, and this has to be exactly the way that you spelt the script when you made it. So just so I can double check, I've spelt it this way. If I go here, you can see that I've spelt it exactly the same way here. So it needs to be spelled exactly the same, with uppercase and lowercase being the same. So I'm going to call that trigger. So I'm just going to save that in a variable and call it trigger, just for easy use. And then I want to go down to my void update method, and then I just want to write if trigger dot is trigger equals true. So what I've done is trigger dot is trigger. I've accessed the script, and I want to call the variable that we made here. I want to call the bool that we made here is trigger. This also has to be spelt the same. So I've said if trigger dot is trigger is true, we want things to happen inside here. So I want to create a public float. Just going to call it number. So we would just want to put the variable number in our void update, in our if statement, and then we just want it to +1 every frame, just to keep it simple. Finish that off with a semicolon, save that. As you can see, I didn't put a semicolon in before, but hey, power of editing. So we need to actually add the script to our cube master. So if we just drag that there you go. And then the cube master script actually wants us to give it the trigger script as well. So if we go to this little circle here, click that, and then it will bring up the object with the trigger script on it. So we just want to double click that, and it will put the script in right there. So once I hit play, keep your eye on the number variable for when we walk into the trigger zone. There you go. So I'm just gonna walk forward, and as you can see, the number just increases and increases and increases, and it will stay increasing until I leave the zone. As you can see, once I've left the zone, the number has stopped rising. So that's one thing we can play with triggers. Let's see how else we can do it. So as I mentioned earlier, I made this cube, and what we want from the cube is we want to manipulate it in some way. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my cube master script, and I'm gonna create, let's just make some space here. Let's get rid of this clutter. In fact, we don't actually need the void start method either. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a public game object, and then we're going to call this cube1. Remember, it's always good to keep the names of your variables very organized and try and name it as relevant to your project as possible, because even though other people might not be able to read it, you might come back to a project one day and not be able to read it either. Organization is key. So now that we've got our public game object, cube1, what we want to do with it is we want to make it disappear as soon as we enter the trigger zone, and then reappear once we've left the trigger zone. So we can do cube1 dot set active false, and it's as simple as that. And just for efficiency, we can write else cube1 dot set active parentheses true. So this will just bring it back once anything other than this is apparent. So if we go back into Unity, let that compile, press play, and as you can see here, we have an error. So what that error is the cube master script actually wants you to drag in cube1. So we have to grab our object, drag that in, or you can use the little circle in the corner. So now that we've done that, if you just keep your eye on the cube from once we enter the trigger zone, as you can see, the trigger has made the cube disappear, and then once we leave it, the cube reappears. Easy peasy. So let's see what other ways we can manipulate it. I don't want to manipulate the game object itself. What I want to do is manipulate the mesh renderer. So if we bring our cube number 2 into play, and I want to make this a bit bigger also because it's quite small. There we go. Okay, and now what I want to do is we want to go back to our cube master script. Okay, so once we're back in Visual Studio, what we want to do is we want to create a public renderer, and then we want to call it cube2 because we have cube number 2. So what we want to do with this renderer is we want to actually change the color of the cube from when we enter the trigger zone, and then reinitiate the initial color from when we leave. So if we go into our update method and go into our trigger if statement, all we have to do is write cube2 dot material dot color, and then set that equal to color dot green. You can do whatever color you want. I just think green is a good color for positivity. So once we save that, now you can see that we get an error at the bottom saying the variable cube2 has not been assigned. So it's the same thing. We have to go to our CubeMaster script and give it cube2's mesh renderer. So once we've done that, we can click play and wander into our trigger zone. And as you can see, all three things play out just as planned. The number is rising, the cube number 1 has disappeared, cube number 2 has turned green just as planned. And if we walk out of the trigger zone, everything has stopped except for the mesh renderer, because the mesh renderer's changes are permanent. So what we need to do is we need to set that back to white for when we leave the trigger zone. So if we go to our else statement here, all we have to do is write cube2.material.color and then set the color equal to white. And then we can save that. Go into Unity, and then that should work perfectly. Excellent. So I hope you've learned a lot from that demonstration. If there are any particular game mechanics that you're interested in and you want to see me do a video on it, please leave a comment down below. If you want to see more content on game mechanics, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.